every dollar out of small business. While we await action from the Senate on H.R. 2, the full repeal of this health care overhaul, I urge my colleagues to vote in support of H.R. 4 today to fix one of the many flaws in the President's health care law. I yield back.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. Gentleman from Michigan.
I yield 2 minutes now to the gentleman from California, Mr. Waxman, the ranking member of the Energy and Commerce Committee.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, there is widespread bipartisan agreement that the 1099 reporting rules need revision. In fact, the agreement is so widespread that I'm mystified why we're having this debate. The Senate passed a repeal of this policy earlier this year on a bipartisan basis. The House last year failed to pass a repeal of the provision only because of Republican opposition, but now we all agree, let's repeal it. What's the hang-up? The hang-up is the Republicans want to pay for this business tax cut on the backs of lower and middle-income families. This bill would increase taxes by $25 billion in total on families earning less than $110,000. Families with incomes around $90,000 per year could see increases in taxes of $3,000, according to the Joint Committee on Taxation. This is a remarkable piece of legislation because it unwinds a near-unanimous agreement that we had last year. This policy wouldn't just increase taxes, it would discourage enrollment in health plans, in health exchanges. Under the Republican proposal, people who are eligible for tax credits would have to think very hard about whether they were estimating their income accurately. They're estimating this income in the beginning of the year, but later in the year they may get a raise, they may get a promotion, they may even get a job. And then they could be hit with a huge repayment penalty for a simple mistake, a promotion or a new job. The Joint Committee on Taxation estimates that this deterrent effect would increase the number of uninsured by $266,000. Let's withdraw this pay for, and let's get something more reasonable. And under these circumstances, I cannot support the bill in its present form today, although I certainly support the changes in the 1099 reporting rules. Yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Michigan.
Thank you. I yield 2 minutes to a distinguished member of the Ways and Means Committee, the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Paulson.
Gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for 2 minutes.
Well, I thank the gentleman and chairman. And Madam Speaker, I rise also in strong support of the legislation here today that will repeal this burdensome 1099 tax requirement contained in the new health care law. Failure to eliminate this provision would result in vast amounts of new paperwork and additional accounting burdens for 30 million businesses that are still struggling in a very downbeat economy. Now, while having gone virtually unnoticed in the context of the entire health care debate, this provision has created quite a bit of concern for companies who are already facing increased regulatory compliance costs as they get ready for this new provision to take effect. Madam Speaker, almost every week I get a chance to visit with a small business back in Minnesota in my district, and nearly every one of them has asked me in bewilderment and in complete disbelief why they would be required to have to do this because of the amount of time and the amount of energy it'll take to comply with this new requirement. So now if there's a small business owner and they want to go into a Target store and they purchase $600 worth of office supplies annually, they're now going to be required to file a new 1099 form, not only with the IRS, but to the Target Corporation. It's a waste of time, and time is money. We need to be thinking about how we can help our nation's small businesses get back on track by growing jobs and helping our economy move forward. It's not the way to do it by increasing more burdensome paperwork and bureaucratic paperwork. We need to let them be productive, to unleash their productivity, rather than filling out unnecessary forms. Madam Speaker, I know with the elimination of this onerous reporting requirement, small businesses are now going to be able to focus where they should focus, their resources on growing jobs and creating a better economy, instead of processing additional paperwork and navigating bureaucratic red tape. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin.
Mr. Levin, do you want to proceed?
Would you like me to use up some time?
Go ahead.
All right, I will. At this time, I yield 2 minutes to a distinguished member of the Ways and Means Committee, the gentleman from Nevada, Mr. Heller.
Gentleman from Nevada is recognized.
Thank you very much, and I thank the chairman for yielding time. I'm an original co-sponsor on H.R. 4 and proudly voted for this measure in the House Ways and Means Committee last month. Madam Speaker, today's debate marks the second time over the course of 3 months that the House has taken the opportunity to discuss the disastrous consequences the health care bill has and will continue to have on our economy. The House passed H.R. 2, which repealed the health care bill with bipartisan support in January. Today, we consider one of the many provisions of the bill that suppress economic recovery and job creation. The 1099 reporting mandate will impose substantial paperwork and reporting burdens on an estimated 40 million entities, including governments, nonprofits, and small businesses. Instead of fostering job creation in the private sector, which is what our economy needs, the provision Congress has passed would direct precious time and resources to collecting volumes of information and filling out mounds of new paperwork for businesses all over throughout the country. Once the economic engine of this nation, small businesses are now buckling under the weight of onerous mandates and high taxes from a federal government that spends too much, taxes too much, and borrows too much. As a result, unemployment in Nevada has reached record highs that currently stand nearly 15%. Efforts to repeal the 1099 provision enjoy bipartisan, bicameral support. I am pleased the House will pass H.R. 4 as part of our commitment to alleviate the burden the previous Congress placed on small businesses and American taxpayers. I remain committed to overturn the health care bill in its entirety. I support targeted legislation, such as H.R. 4, to provide economic relief as soon as possible. I thank the gentleman again for the time, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin.
It's my pleasure to yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from New York, Mr. Rangel.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 3 minutes. Without objection.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I would hope that today that we would have taken advantage of the fact that all of us want to get rid of a part of the President's affordable health bill that we believe does not reach the objective that we wanted. Everybody, including the President of the United States, believe that 1099 in the present form should not be there. Republicans and Democrats have voted to make certain it not be there. The last time we attempted to correct it, we felt that because of the billions of dollars that would be lost for trying to get rid of it, we passed a law, and it was rejected because the majority party didn't like what we call a pay-for. Since that time, the pay-for has been passed into law, it's been accepted, and now we're trying to find a new one. I don't know in God's heavens as to why we couldn't have sat down to find one, as long as we certainly wanted to avoid fraud on the taxpayer and work out something that's fair. I can't believe that the majority would believe that what we're trying to do is to avoid, doesn't believe, to avoid having an unintended tax on hardworking people. And so if this is going to hold it up and cause us now to throw the baby out with the bathwater, to have us rejecting what we want to do, and that is to get rid of 1099 in its present form, I think it's unfortunate. Now, I do recognize, Mr. Chairman and members of our distinguished committee, that political promises have been made before the election. And the question now has to be that even though there's been commitments by certain party in the majority that they have to provide savings through cutting, those two things should be somehow related. Every cut that we have in the budget, whether it's the continued resolution or budget of 2011 or 2010, doesn't mean that there's a savings. And so telling the voters and our constituents that we've slashed something out of the budget, it really goes beyond politics, because never in the discussions that I've had in the Ways and Means Committee with the majority or with the Democratic caucus have we ever said, would those people that are going to be helped or hurt Democrats? Are those people Republicans? Or did we not say that we were sincerely trying to help all Americans to make certain they have affordable health care? For the majority not to want to correct whatever they think is wrong, but to make a campaign commitment they're going to eliminate the bill, eliminate the president, and just make certain they have $100 billion in savings, or strike that in cuts, I think is really unfair to present these political problems to the American people. So I do hope that after we reject this, not because the goal is not one that's bipartisan and with the support of the administration, but because how it's paid for is detrimental to the taxpayer, whether he or she be Republican or Democrat. And I thank you for this opportunity.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Camp.
Thank you. At this time, I yield 2 minutes to a distinguished member of the Ways and Means Committee, the gentlewoman from Tennessee, Ms. Black.
Gentlewoman from Tennessee is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I rise today enthusiastically supporting H.R. 4, the 1099 repeal bill. The piece of legislation is a victory for common sense, and it's proof that the House is dedicated to getting the government off of the backs of the American small businesses and working for the people again. This bill does 3 things. It reduces the deficit, it protects our taxpayers from waste, and it eases the burdens on small businesses who too often have to deal with government breathing down their necks and stifling their growth. If this provision were left untouched in the President's health care law, small businesses across the country would be buried in paperwork. Instead of growing their businesses, advertising their services and selling their products and hiring workers and growing our economy, business owners would be stuck behind a desk filling out IRS forms. Just this morning in the Wall Street Journal, it was reported by a survey that the small business owners are finding it more and more difficult to file their tax forms because of the onerous paperwork. It's unconscionable that the Democrat Congress paid for their massive spending on their health care bill on the backs of the American small businesses, but today we're going to fix that. And as a member of Ways and Means, I'm extremely proud to have seen this repeal bill take shape in our committee. I'm proud that we paid for this bill by protecting taxpayers instead of demanding more money of them, by reducing waste, fraud, and abuse in the Democrats' health care law. We paid for this 1099 repeal, which reduces the deficit by $166 million in the first 10 years and by billions of dollars over a long run, while reducing the federal spending by nearly $200 billion over 10 years. This is a huge victory, but it marks the beginning of a new way that we're doing business here in Washington. This new House majority will continue to enact common sense policy that does not add to the debt or hide their true costs with accounting gimmicks. And we can get the government working for the American people today.
I yield an additional 30 seconds.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We can get government working for the American people today, and this is a good start. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin. Does the gentleman wish to reserve?
Should I go? Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Levin.
I yield now 3 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pasquale, an active member of our committee.
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Sandy. Madam Speaker, good to see you up there today. You know, there's an old Western song, I'm looking for love in all the wrong places. Remember that song? Not too old, not too old. We're looking for revenue in all the wrong places, not only in reference to what we did in cutting indiscriminately $60 billion, which mostly affects the middle class, and I think very dangerously. So this provision was in the health care bill, which deals with bureaucracy at its worst, I would agree. But in July of 2010, we voted with, I think, only, correct me if I'm wrong, 2 Republicans. We had a shot at this in the very beginning of mankind, right, last summer, to vote against it. I believe every Democrat voted against this provision. and 2 Republicans joined us. The gentleman from Louisiana on the opposition side, the honorable opposition side, who is no longer with us. Now, I don't know if he lost because he voted with us. And then another gentleman from North Carolina who voted with us. We had a shot at this. We could have taken care of this last year, and you chose not to. So let's set the record straight. So here we are with this 1099 form. It's going to take some time to fill it out. We don't like that bureaucracy. The thing comes down to, as Mr. Waxman said, as Mr. Neal said, how do you pay for it? Now beware, the distinguished chairman for the Ways and Means Committee. The Wall Street poll today, not the New York Times, not the Village Voice, not fill in the blanks. The poll shows that over, I think it's 74% of the American people, that's us, believe that we should eliminate tax credits for big oil and gas companies. So I'm sure now that the loyal opposition sees that poll in that newspaper that you will join us in putting to rest forever those folks who least need any help from the government getting help from the government. Now, this is going to cost us $22 billion. Both sides agree that one of the great benefits of this country is economic mobility, yet, may I have 2 more minutes?
I yield an additional 2 minutes to the gentleman from
Gentleman's
New
recognized
Jersey.
for an additional
Thank
2
you,
minutes.
Madam Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Levin. This bill punishes those who get ahead by raising the tax liabilities on families, worked hard, may have gotten a raise or a promotion. A family of 4 in my district, the 8th District of New Jersey, please visit us. We would love to have you, Mr. Chairman. You make $80,000 a year. You'll get a 50% reduction on their premiums if they purchase health insurance in the marketplace from the private sector, I might add. There's no government operation here. If they get a raise, however, and move above the threshold, they pay back a reasonable amount now. But in this legislation, under this bill, if they work a little harder, receive a financial benefit, they'll be punished. They'll be forced to repay the tax credit. There is no answer to that question. It's a fact of life. This means that the family, which I'm talking about now, will be hit with a surprise, get this, Madam Speaker, of $11,200 tax bill. $20,000 premium, they're going to have to pay. They make $80,000, quite a hefty fee, I might add. Everything's wonderful with the health care in the United States right now. But you're going to be added onto because you made a few bucks more, $11,200. Unintended consequences, looking for love in all the wrong places. So let us be perfectly clear to the members voting on this legislation. When you take away the tax credits, it's not a subsidy. It's not only a definitional difference, it is a substantial difference between a subsidy and a tax credit. When you take away that tax credit, to middle-class Americans, that they use it when purchasing insurance, plain and simple, your taxes go up. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Camp.
I yield 3 minutes to a distinguished member of the Ways and Means Committee, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Teaberry.
Gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of the underlying bill today, which goes a long way in job creation. Jobs, jobs, jobs. We heard about that in the November election. We heard about the fact that small business owners in particular were going to be hampered by a provision, actually 2 provisions, one provision in the health care bill that appeared, that everyone now seems to be opposed to, that the majority voted for. But then another provision that appeared in a bill in September of 2010 that even went further than the underlying provision in the health care bill that applied to folks who own rental property, or someone who has a vacation home, or somebody who has retail property that they're leasing out, or somebody who is leasing out a room in their home. Suddenly now we are going to require them to 1099 folks as well. What an amazing provision, passed in September of 2010. The bill corrects that. The bill corrects both aspects. I heard over and over during my campaign, think about this, Bob Roach, an independent insurance agent, goes out to Staples and buys paper. He's going to have to 1099 Staples. Goes to a hardware store to have something fixed in his office. He's going to have to 1099 the hardware store. It goes on and on and on. When a small business owner, a law-abiding small business owner, maybe a sole proprietor, now is being made the person who has to go out and be an extension of the IRS. It is truly amazing. And then the pay for is requiring someone who gets something more than they're entitled to pay it back. What a novel concept. With no penalty, no interest. Just pay back something that they're not entitled to. Now, my dad, my immigrant dad and immigrant mom, I was talking to them about this, and my dad has a 6th grade education, my mom has an 8th grade education, and they were, first of all, quite surprised with the fact that a family of 4 making $88,000 a year would get a subsidy. My mom and dad dreamed of making $88,000, never came close to it. But they're middle class, and they're not looking for a subsidy, and they certainly would pay it back if they got more than what they were entitled to. Madam Speaker, this is about fairness. This is about jobs. This is about equity. This is about moving our economy forward. This is about law-abiding citizens not becoming extension of the IRS. You're either for them or against them. I urge support for the bill. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr.
I
Levin.
yield myself 15 seconds.
Gentleman's recognized.
The gentleman from Ohio mentioned jobs, jobs, jobs. You know, in a colloquial sense, what this bill would do, it would do a job on middle-income taxpayers. I now yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, a member of our committee, Mr. Doggett.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentleman. I have voted previously to repeal these 1099 reporting requirements, and but for broad Republican opposition, these requirements would have been repealed a long time ago. I am a little amused to hear one of our Republican colleagues actually say this morning they're bewildered as to why there are all these requirements on small businesses around the country as a result of this provision. I can cure your bewilderment. Get a mirror out and look in the mirror, because you will see the Republicans who voted against repealing this provision last year. No, this is not about repealing 1099. It is about shifting the burden onto working families while at the same time protecting insurance monopolies. Under current law, despite the vigorous, determined efforts of these Republicans to undermine every aspect of health insurance reform, under current law, working families will receive an opportunity to access health insurance. And each year, the government will match some of the workers' pay for their health insurance. The precise amount of the pay is determined by how low the worker's salary is. A minimum wage worker would get a little more assistance than someone who's up at a little higher level. This bill ensures that the health insurance company will get to keep all of that federal match, but it treats the working family considerably differently. If you have an employer who really shows ability, who may have a fairly menial or mundane job, but they do it and they do it with pride, they do it well. If that employee excels and the employer rewards them with a bonus, if they recognize that that employee is really trying hard and they decide we're going to give you a little promotion and you'll get a little more pay. Or perhaps, as with so many families around this country, that employee decides, I'll never make it for my family on this. I'm going to moonlight. I'm going to take an extra job. Under any of these developments for the enterprising worker, the Republicans propose today a penalty, a tax on success. Because at the end of that year, after that law-abiding employee has properly estimated their income from 12 months earlier, if their pay went up $1 over the level, they get a steep penalty. They may have to pay literally thousands of dollars back, even though they only got a bonus of a few $100s. They would owe the value, perhaps, of the entire credit to the IRS. And what type of people are we talking about? Well, if the law had been fully effective, as I wish it had been this year, a worker who was earning $43,560, if they got a bonus that took them up to $43,600, they would have owed the full amount of the credit at the end of the year. May I have an additional minute?
An additional 2 minutes.
The gentleman's recognized.
$1,000, perhaps $3,000 or $4,000 to a family as a penalty, a tax on success, is a big amount to that family. But understand the dimensions of how big the burden that they want to shift to working families is. The total, according to their own report on this bill, is almost $25 billion over the next decade. We're not talking about a small amount of money. We're talking about a significant amount of money in this Republican penalty on success. And why haven't they been out here responding to this penalty on success? They want to refer to these people as cheats. These people aren't cheats. They're people that are the best of America, who are striving and working to get ahead, and then they get penalized for their success. They have no answer because there is no answer. We should have passed this bill last year and passed it by paying for it by closing international corporate tax loopholes. Naturally, they resist that, just as they resist any attempt to control insurance monopolies. Vote no on this penalty for success that would be imposed on our working families. Vote against this piece of legislation. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Camp.
At this time, I yield 2 minutes to a distinguished member of the Ways and Means Committee, the gentleman from North Dakota, Mr. Byrd.
Gentleman from North Dakota is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I rise today in firm support of eliminating this 1099 requirement that burdens so many of our small businesses and costs jobs. Madam Speaker, if Congress is serious about getting Americans back to work and our economy back on track, the choice is clear. We need to repeal this mandate. This law forces American businesses deeper and deeper into the bureaucratic Washington nightmare for small business. And it takes them away from their core mission, which is to grow their business and create jobs. Small business is the core of North Dakota's economy. Farmers, ranchers, and small businessmen, they're all burdened by this mandate. And another regulation is another expense that makes it even more difficult for them to do business. This is common sense legislation. With national unemployment still hovering around 9%, the decision to repeal this mandate should be easy. We desperately need economic renewal. We need private sector job growth, and we need to eliminate small business paperwork that's in this mandate. It's time to eliminate this onerous mandate and allow business get back to doing what they do best, and that's create American jobs. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin.
It's now my pleasure to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Richmond.
Gentleman from Louisiana is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Ranking Member Levin. I agree with the Republican chorus that we've been hearing now for 2 days, which is, let's repeal this onerous provision of the 1099 requirement. However, even as a freshman member of the Democratic Party, let me say welcome to the party. The Democratic Party started this July 30th of last year to try to repeal this onerous provision, and only 2 Republicans voted for it. 239 Democrats said, let's do away with this. You're right. It's putting a massive burden on our small businesses. But not only did you get to the party 7 months late, you got it wrong. You decided to dance with big oil and corporations that you didn't want to close the tax loophole. So what's the pay for? Well, the pay for is to reach in the pockets of working-class Americans and take $25 billion. Right now, there are people that are at work, and we're here in D.C., and we're going to take $25 billion out of their pocket. We should be ashamed of ourselves. So I would just say that I join with my colleagues and my good friend, Mr. Crowley, who on yesterday tried to have a discourse about, is there a better way to pay for it? No one would yield. No one would take amendments. So I would just say, as a new member, what the American people want is when we agree on an idea, let's repeal the 1099 provision. They want us to get together and figure out how to do it. They want us to see if we can't find some amendments, find some common ground so that we don't have to penalize working families. And I would say what they don't want is for us to reach in their pocket, penalize them for success, take $25 billion when there are other ways to do it. But what we should do is get together, figure out a way to do it so that we can start moving this country forward. And I'll yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Camp.
I yield 1 minute to the gentlewoman from New York.
Gentlewoman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 4, the Small Business Paperwork Elimination Act. Too often, Congress and the federal government pass and institute regulations without counting the cost to America's businesses, the lifeblood of our economic success. The Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act's 1099 reporting requirement for small businesses will be, in the words of Nathan Andrews, Vice President of Morris Manufacturing, an 88-year-old company in East Syracuse, a paperwork nightmare. He further adds that the requirement will hamper the ability of his company to function, grow, and create jobs. This mandate is really indicative of a larger problem, the stranglehold that regulations have on our country. And while regulations are sometimes necessary and often well-intentioned, they have been increasingly becoming an obstacle to our success as a nation. By success, I mean creating an environment where businesses can flourish, providing jobs so that the American people can obtain health insurance while still benefiting from the best health care system in the world. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I yield back.
Gentlewoman's time has expired. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin.
How much time is there on each side, if you would?
The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin, has 10 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Camp, has 37 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Mr. Levin wish to reserve the balance of his time?
I do.
Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Camp.
At this time, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Mississippi.
Gentleman from Mississippi is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In a day when America has been suffering for nearly 2 years from significant unemployment, when nearly 1 in 10 of our neighbors is unemployed, it's our duty to do everything we can to allow these employers to focus on job creation. Today, we'll vote to repeal the burdensome 1099 provision included in Obamacare. As pledged to the American people, we'll work to get this unpopular job-destroying law off the books. We voted to repeal it outright. We voted to defund it. And today we begin the process of repealing it piece by piece. In order to comply with this 1099 mandate, businesses would have to spend countless hours of generating and receiving needless amounts of paperwork. Now, I've started a small business, and I know the rewards and challenges of entrepreneurship. And I can tell you those challenges don't need to involve filing needless paperwork. Last summer, when I visited Tricia's Day Spa in Grenada, Mississippi, and I explained to Tricia Schenkel the 1099 requirement in Obamacare, she said such a requirement would be devastating to her business. That's been the conclusion reached in small businesses around America. Today, a huge burden will be lifted from the shoulders of small businesses, and for that I'm grateful.
I yield the gentleman another minute.
Gentleman's recognized for an additional minute.
Today, a huge burden will be lifted from the shoulders of small businesses, and that's why I'm proud to co-sponsor this legislation and why I will vote to repeal it. Thank you.
Gentleman
I
yields.
yield the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin, would you like
I
to?
reserve the balance.
Gentleman continues to reserve time. Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Camp.
At this time, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Colorado.
Gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today I rise in support of H.R. 4, which would eliminate the 1099 mandate instituted by the President's takeover of the health care bill. I've spoke with countless constituents around the 4th Congressional District of Colorado, not as Republicans, not as Democrats, but as business owners, as people who have worked hard to build up their companies from scratch into successful opportunities for themselves and their families. They oppose the 1099 provisions of the health care bill, not because they're Republicans, not because they're Democrats, but because they know it would cause grave impact on their businesses and their ability to continue to thrive and grow and hire new people. Madam Speaker, they are speaking as the voice of this country's businesses, the backbone of our economy. If we are going to create jobs in this country to move our country forward, then we have got to do it by repealing and starting by the repealing of the 1099 provisions. A bill passed last Congress, in the 111th Congress. It doesn't matter the day or the time, but what passed was a bill where people said, we need to pass a bill to know what's in the bill. People read the bill. They know what's in the bill. In Weld County, a businessman is going to spend 40 hours a month to comply with these provisions. In Larimer County, a manufacturing company.
I yield the gentleman an additional 30 seconds. Thank you.
In Larimer County, a manufacturing company is going to have to hire new people to comply with the provisions of this act. Is that the kind of job creation this body is looking for? Let's create penalties on business and hope that it drives the economy? That's not right. Madam Speaker, today I urge the passage of H.R. 4, both Republicans and Democrats standing up to fight for businesses of this country to get our economy moving forward again. I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin, wish to continue reserving time.
Yes, Mr. Camp, if he's ready to close. You have the final word.
I have several more speakers.
Then I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Michigan,
At this time, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Florida.
Gentleman from Florida is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I stand here to support H.R. 4 for the repeal of the 1099 bill. At a time when business owners are trying to survive in a sea of economic turmoil, our government has thrown them an anchor instead of a life preserver. Democrats have borrowed and spent $1 trillion of their stimulus program, and the unemployment rate has remained stuck at or above 9% for nearly 2 years. Our focus must be on measures that will actually help American workers and allow employers to focus on job creation. H.R. 4 will protect small businesses, their workers, and American taxpayers. H.R. 4 repeals the onerous tax reporting provisions Democrats enacted last year to help pay for both their health care law and the TARP 3 legislation. It also protects taxpayers by reducing waste, fraud, and abuse in the Democrats' health care law. Finally, this bill will reduce the deficit by $166 million in the first 10 years and by billions of dollars over the long run, while reducing federal spending by nearly $20 billion over the next 10 years. During a time when the unemployment rate is at or above 9%, additional government mandates on small businesses is, from the standpoint of economic policy, nothing short of idiotic. We should be looking for ways to free small businesses and companies from unnecessary burdens. We should be looking for ways to encourage entrepreneurship. Instead, we have mandates that impose new obstacles for companies. We should be seeking ways to restart the engine of job growth. Let me be clear that I accept the proposition that every person and every business entity has both a moral and legal obligation to fully report their taxable income. The fundamental problem with the new 1099 reporting requirement is that they are imposed on a broad universe of small business taxpayers that annually conduct more than $600 of transactions with other vendors. The new filing requirements are both burdensome as well as over-inclusive. Madam Speaker, let us remember that even during the State of the Union address,
I yield an additional 30 seconds.
Even during the State of the Union address, the President gave his support to repeal this onerous, burdensome, and misguided mandate. I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Does Mr. Levin wish to continue reserving time? Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Camp.
Thank you. At this time, I yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Washington.
Gentlewoman from Washington is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And today I come to the floor in support of this legislation because business owners in Southwest Washington sent me here to clear the runway for them to start growing and hiring more people. In my district, I know a restaurant owner in Vancouver and a doctor who runs a small practice in Tumwater who simply don't have the resources to comply with the expanded 1099 mandate. And I'd rather have them focusing on opening a new franchise or offering services to patients, basically being successful entrepreneurs, than spending time reacting to the mountains of paperwork they're going to owe the IRS. My entire region in Southwest Washington has been suffering under double-digit unemployment for multiple years. In my district's largest Clark County, the jobless rate hovers between 13 and 14%, and that's reported. There are a lot of people who have stopped reporting. I know we're not unique. The entire country is depending on Congress to make job creation a serious priority. And by passing this bill today, we're showing the people of Southwest Washington and across America that we're taking them very seriously. You know, as I meet with small business owners in my district, they express two major sentiments to me over and over again: fear and uncertainty. They're afraid and uncertain about what this government is going to do to them next. What I'd like to do today is eliminate the uncertainty around this 1099 mandate. Small businesses from across my district continue to ask me for predictability from their government when it comes to regulations and taxes. Instead of fear, increased bureaucracy, or higher costs, I'm committed to providing them with that predictability. By voting to repeal the 1099 paperwork mandate today, we do two things. First, we take an immediate step that would provide regulatory relief to the clinic in Tumwater and the restaurant in Vancouver. Second, we send a signal to America that Congress is changing the way it views small businesses. They aren't piggy banks allowed to exist only to foot the bill.
An additional minute.
Gentlewoman's recognized.
Thank you. Only to foot the bill on terribly ill-conceived and unaffordable government programs. Today, this new Congress lets small businesses know that we see them as the heart and soul of what makes this country great, as entrepreneurs that can grow and thrive and succeed as far as their hard work can take them. That's the job creation plan that has worked for this country for the last 2 centuries. And I'm confident it's the plan that will put folks in Southwest Washington and across our country back to work. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin.
Mr. Camp, are you ready to close?
Yes, I'm prepared to close.
Mr. Crowley is going to close for us. I'll yield myself first 1 minute.
Gentleman's recognized.
You know, one of the speakers on the majority side said that this was an effort to repeal health care piece by piece. That is clearly their misguided motivation. Here, what they're trying to do is on the backs of the middle class of America. They don't defend the pay-for except by misrepresentation. A tax increase is a tax increase is a tax increase. On the middle class, on the middle class, on the middle class. I yield the balance of our time to Mr. Crowley.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for up to 9 minutes.
I thank the gentleman from Michigan and his yielding me the balance of the time. I want to thank all my colleagues for coming to the floor today to defend the middle class of this country. We all believe, and I think both Democrats and Republicans, it's been evident here today, all believe that the 1099 provisions need to be repealed. We recognize that. We too want to help small business. We recognize that small business is the backbone of employment opportunity in our country. And that effort has been bipartisan. It has been bipartisan in the Senate, but not here. It's because we don't
like the pay-for provision that my Republican colleagues are proposing and putting forward in this legislation, because we believe that they switch the burden from the small businessman and woman and they place it on the backs of the working class in this country. We want to work in a bipartisan way. We believe we could work together and come up with a solution. Now, I have to be honest, no one on the other side has asked me for a compromise solution. Hasn't happened. And we passed this bill out of committee about a week and a half ago, almost 2 weeks ago, and still no one has said, Joe, do you have an idea? We have a couple of good ideas over here. We're willing to share them with my colleagues on the other side, but that hasn't happened as of yet. I'm sorry that hasn't happened, because I thought in this new Congress we'd have more bipartisanship, and unfortunately that hasn't developed as of yet, at least as it pertains to this bill. I'd also like to note that we're going on our third month here in the House of Representatives, and quite frankly, I can't see much of what we've done. Can't say we've done much of anything, quite frankly. I can say that if you add up the total, we've imposed upon the American people an additional $80 billion in taxes in different various ways, the latest of which will be this $25 billion that we're going to impose upon the middle class if this bill passes today and somehow becomes law. This bill, if enacted, will be a massive increase of tax on the middle class. I gave an example earlier today. It must have been about 2 hours ago, of a family of four earning $88,000, approximately 397% of the federal poverty level. And I mentioned if the breadwinner in that family, if the husband or his wife or either of the spouses is the breadwinner in that family, and they get a bonus of $250. I said before, they've done great work. Their management material, it's kind of laughable. Management material, here's $250, go out and buy the family a steak dinner. That $250 would bump them up to $88,250, which would place them at 401 percentile of the federal poverty level. And it would expose that middle-class family, because of a $250 bonus, to $4,460. Not a single member of the majority, and we've had over 19 members of the majority testify or give remarks on the floor this morning and this afternoon, not a single one has refuted or in any way questioned the example I've given. You have not refuted that example, which can only bring one to conclude that the example I have given is indeed correct. I don't want it to be correct, but indeed it is correct. And if it's correct, it means a tax on the middle class, one that they cannot afford, especially during these difficult times. We don't know when these tough times will they ever end for the middle class. And I think it's shameful the way in which the middle class has been characterized on the floor, that somehow they are the folks that cheat the system, that they're the ones that can't be trusted. We're not talking about the rich. We can trust the rich. We know that. And I don't like class warfare, but you know what? The truth is we've let the people at the highest percent get off with no shared sacrifice whatsoever. No sacrifice. Go on living your lives. We'll have 2 wars. You know, we'll increase the deficit, but don't worry. You all go on living your lives in mansions, and don't worry about the rest of the country, because it really won't affect you in the end. You'll always survive. You can always hire a police force to protect you. If you need health care, you can buy a doctor. If you need your garbage picked up, well, you know, sanitation won't pick it up anymore, but you can pay someone, and they'll cart it away. Live in a glass house. But the middle class, who are struggling so much, who are looking for some breaks, looking for an opportunity to afford health care for themselves and for their families. Health care. They just want to be on an even plane somewhat with everyone else if they can afford health care. And the federal government is not giving a handout. This is not a subsidy. This is not welfare. These are tax credits, like the college tax credit that many of our constituents afford themselves of, like the child tax credit that many of our constituents afford themselves of. It's a tax credit to help them afford health insurance for their families. And they never touch the money. It'd be one thing if you said to me, they got $5,000 in vouchers and they took the money and they went off and they bought plane tickets to Hawaii for the family for that year. Or they took the money and they bought a new car. Or they took the money and they bought furniture for their house. You know, that's scamming the system. That is wrong. That we don't promote. But they never touch the money. The money goes to the insurance company. You know, the insurance companies who desperately need that money, they get the money. They're covered. They're fine. We don't ask them to be the watchdogs. We don't ask them to make sure the family's in compliance, make sure they're not going to go over their income levels. They get the money. They walk away, wipe their hands of it. They're taken care of. But it's the poor family that inadvertently, unbeknownst to themselves, goes over the limit, and they go over the cliff. And when they go over the cliff, it's at the tune of nearly $5,000 that they would have to repay. Instead of rewarding success, which I hear from my Republican colleagues all the time, we need to reward success. We're not doing it in this instance. What we are doing is we are taxing success, as my friend from Wisconsin pointed out. We're taxing success. Often I hear about, from my friends on the other side, we need to encourage people to work hard, work harder. Don't worry about the clock. Don't worry about the clock. Work harder. Get ahead. And we should not be stopping that. But here is a perfect example, and it's not coming from this side of the aisle, it's coming from that side of the aisle, of we're saying, you know what, maybe you shouldn't work so hard. Maybe you should pay attention to the clock. Maybe you should make sure that when you file, you know, you're not tripping yourself up and discouraging them, unfortunately, discouraging that family from getting health insurance because they're afraid they'll owe a new tax of nearly $5,000. And I agree with my friend from Wisconsin again. This is nothing more than a Republican tax trap. It is a trap to the middle class. It's a trap to them. It's disparaging. And it's unfortunate that my colleagues have placed it in this light, that somehow we're reducing or eliminating the burden from one group of workers and placing them on the backs of the middle-class worker. I don't begrudge the small businessman and woman. I was one myself before I came to Congress. I know the burdens. I understand the bills. I understand what comes in. But please, don't remove the burden from the from the small businessman and woman and place that on the backs of middle-class taxpayers. That's what you're doing. If you vote for this bill, you will vote to increase taxes on the middle class. Don't kid yourselves. A tax on the middle class.
Gentleman's time has expired.
I thank the gentlelady.
Gentleman from Michigan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself the balance of my time.
Gentleman to 30 minutes.
I can assure the Speaker that I will not be using all of the balance of my time.
Recognized.
There has been a lot of rhetoric today, and as this debate winds down and as we prepare to vote on this legislation, I urge my colleagues to look at the facts. I think many of the arguments we've heard from the other side ignore reality. It ignores the reality of their own legislation that they passed. It ignores the reality of their own votes. Under the health care bill, you put cliffs in the bill if we want to talk about cliffs. There are levels where people need to pay back the entire amount of the subsidy they receive. In the original bill, that was at 400% of poverty. That is the level that is no legislation we see today. Later in December, when you wanted to address the doctor fix, you just moved that level up to 500% of poverty. There is still a cliff in the bill. There was a cliff in the original bill. There is a cliff now. Also, this idea that repaying a subsidy to which one is not entitled is somehow a new concept was in the original health care legislation. It still is in the original health care legislation. We just believe we need to take further steps to protect the taxpayers. And I would also say that if you look at the legislation, there is on page 123 a subpart B eligibility determination where applicants apply for the subsidy, and they're required to report certain things, but they're also required under this section to report changes in circumstances. That obligation is on the taxpayer, on the person seeking the subsidy, and that is in their legislation, and we think that's an important concept to protect. Let's stick with the facts. The fact is the increased tax reporting requirements enacted last year will hurt our ability to create jobs. The 1099 provision hurts our ability to create jobs in this country. In fact, the unemployment rate has been stuck at or above 9% for nearly 2 years. And this Congress owes it to the American people to do everything it can to help small businesses, job creators, and workers get back on their feet. In fact, repealing the 1099 provision is a top priority of small businesses, and that's why we have over 225 organizations supporting this legislation, including the nation's largest small business organization, the NFIB. In fact, this bill is a tax cut and a spending cut, and that's why it has the support of groups like the Americans for Tax Reform, the National Taxpayer Union, and Americans for Prosperity. Madam Speaker, I urge my colleagues to vote for this bill so small business can get back to what they do best, creating jobs, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. All time for debate on the bill has expired. The question is ordered on the bill as amended. The question is on engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to repeal the expansion of information reporting requirements for payments of $600 or more to corporations and for other purposes.
For what purposes, gentleman from California, rise?
I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
Is the gentleman opposed to the bill?
I am opposed in its current form.
Gentleman qualify?
Madam Speaker, I reserve a point of order.
A point of order is reserved. Clerk will report the motion.
Mr. McNerney of California moves to recommit the bill H.R. 4 to the Committee on Ways and Means with instructions to report the same back to the House forthwith with the following amendment. At the end of the bill...
Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to dispense with the reading.
Is there objection? Is heard. Continue reading.
Add at the end of the bill the following new sections. Section 5, non-refundable personal credit for taxpayers subject to a tax increase under the Small Business Paperwork Mandate Elimination Act of 2011. A, in general, Subpart A of Part 4 of Subchapter A of Chapter 1 of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 is amended by inserting after Section 25D the following new section. Section 25E, credit for taxpayers subject to a tax increase under the Small Business Paperwork Mandate Elimination Act of 2011. A, in general, in the case of an individual, there shall be allowed as a credit against the tax imposed by this chapter for the taxable year an amount equal to the excess, if any, of 1, the regular tax liability of the taxpayer for the taxable year over 2, the regular tax liability for the taxpayer for the taxable year determined by applying Section 36B F2 as in effect on the day before the date of the enactment of this section in lieu of Section 36B F2 as in effect on the day after the date of the enactment of this section. B, carry forward of unused credit. 1, rule for years in which all personal credits allowed against regular and alternative minimum tax. In the case of a taxable year to which Section 26A2 applies, if the credit allowable under subsection A exceeds the limitation imposed by Section 26A2 for such taxable year, reduced by the sum of the credits allowable under this subpart, other than this section, such excess shall be carried to the succeeding taxable year and added to the credit allowable under subsection A for such succeeding taxable year. 2. Rule for other years. In the case of a taxable year to which Section 26A2 does not apply, if the credit allowable under subsection A exceeds the limitation imposed by Section 26A1 for such taxable year reduced by the sum of the credits allowable under this subpart, other than this section, such excess shall be carried to the succeeding taxable year and added to the credit allowable under subsection A for such succeeding taxable year. B. Conforming amendments. 1. Section 24B, 3B of such code is amended by inserting 25E after 25D. 2. Section 25E1C of such code is amended by inserting 25E after 25D, both places it appears. 3. Section 25AI5B of such code is amended by inserting 25E after 25D. 4. Section 25BG2 of such code